Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Bishop Rome, for your wonderful addresses to us. What a treat you've feasted us to. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's your turn. Can I invite both Simon and Bishop Rowan to join us, or to join me? I'll take questions. So put your hand up if you've got a question for me, and I'll bring the mic to you. Sir.
Good evening. My question is really for the Ely Cathedral Business Group. We've heard from Mr. Green earlier, who was talking about the relationship between the local business community and the local community more generally. And I wonder whether that we need to have a little bit more analysis of that question so that we can understand precisely what we mean. Because if we are going to enjoy and celebrate local enterprise and the value that that creates for our local communities in terms of employment, in terms of wealth that's brought in and shared around that community, that's great. But there is a problem with big business, with multinational corporations, with organizations that use global techniques to provide their wealth. They will go to China or Indonesia to find labor to exploit in order to create the wealth here in this country. They will use zero-hour contracts in this country, and they will avoid their tax. What we need to be careful to ensure is that when we're looking at how we create our wealth in this local community, that we're doing it in a way that is generous and honourable and gives flourishing to all people, local and global. I wonder whether the Cathedral Business Group might think about that.
Thank you. Maybe, Simon, you'd pick up the point.
I am that person who buys clothes in China and fabric in Italy and brings them back on a boat. That's what I do. And I would say that I think what you have just expressed is deeply mean-spirited. I apologize. I know you're coming from a good place, but I think it's mean-spirited that if you go to China or India or Bangladesh and you see countries that are being lifted out of poverty, that are being provided with work and resources and medical care and roads and security that they could not have dreamed of 50 years ago, I don't think you would use the word exploit. And there is a terrible myth that trade does not create wealth. And if I can explain with a little story very quickly, how my father explained it to me. Two men on a desert island. One man has pots and firewood, the other nets. And they don't talk to each other. They're scared of each other. They fear that the man with pots fears he's going to get his pots stolen. And he'll be put out of business as a pot maker, and vice versa. And one day, the net man decides to give some of his surplus nets to the man in exchange for some of his surplus pots. And suddenly both men go, one from eating very little well-cooked fish, the other from plenty of raw fish. They both go to a position where they are both wealthier, both eating more, both eating cooked food, and nothing other than an exchange has taken place. That exchange that is called globalization is lifting the world out of poverty, and I see that in the countries that I visit. Of course, companies must pay their taxes. Of course, they shouldn't be giving zero-hour contracts, and nor should our factories in those countries. But the vast majority of businesses work extremely hard to make sure those practices don't happen.
We'll take another question.
Hello, thank you both very much for your thoughts on wealth. It was really interesting to hear both the different perspectives. I had an immediate reaction to the idea of the potential for unlimited wealth creation based on the fact that we live on a finite planet and there are limited resources in the world, and essentially everything that's creating wealth comes back to those natural resources. And I wondered if you would be able to say a few things about that, and also if you could say a little bit about environmental sustainability in relation to wealth and well-being too. Thank you.
Bishop Rowan?
Thanks very much. Though I'd like to hear also from my colleague. I share that, that concern, not that we should begin necessarily with a principle of scarcity. I think that there's a real problem with that, I agree. But there is also a problem about finite material resource. The iPhone example is a good one, because that's an example of what you might call a refinement of what we have, a conceptual refinement, a development which doesn't automatically mean there's a massive increase in our dependence on material resources, though there's an issue there. And I think that's what I had in mind when I said the change we're looking at has to be change that is sustainable. It has to be change that we can look at in a long term and say, well, yep, we can manage that. We can manage that. What I think we're growing out of slowly is the, if you like, the mindset of the 19th century and quite a bit of the 20th century, which was, well, there's lots of stuff around. Let's not think about the day after tomorrow. We have begun to move away from that, and I welcome that. And I hope that doesn't necessarily mean, if you like, as I said earlier, battening down the hatches and simply saying, well, there's nowhere to go. Because there are conceptual refinements, there are shifts in the ways we do things, which leave that open. But I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
I agree, and I disagree. I agree that if we are inconsiderate in our use of resources, then we will end up destroying the most important thing that we have in the economy, which is a wonderful place to live. So we have to be very careful about pollution, not just air pollutants, but noise pollution, light pollution, anything that upsets the natural environment that we love. On the issue of resources running out, the good news is that what tends to happen is that price stops resources running out. And had we not had the Industrial Revolution on the basis that coal would run out, we would all be living in an infinitely poorer world. One of the things that I'm investing in at the moment is a small business, sadly based outside Oxford. It's a shame, but it's the truth, that is developing fusion energy. There are 5 companies developing this energy. It is clean, it's safe, it produces helium as its main exhaust, and its fuel is one of the cheapest materials on Earth, lithium. 1 bucket of lithium and deuterium is worth 10 million buckets of oil in terms of energy release, and is clean. It may take 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, but it will happen. And it's that faith in the future and trust in the innovative of mankind that has stopped us in the past shutting down our world, and we mustn't let it do that today.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Simon, both of you this evening have talked about the importance of risk and the importance of profit. And I'm just wondering whether Next is taking that opportunity to look at redefining what profit is in terms of not just monetary but social and environmental you have just touched on. And also, Simon, my understanding is that Next's name and brand came from what was considered a rather tired retail clothing market, and it was looking at what the next thing, the innovation. And do you think you still live up to that brand name?
Well, if we don't live up to the brand name and don't innovate, the one thing that you can guarantee in fashion is that we will fail. So I can't promise you that I'm doing that, but what I can promise you is that we're trying our hardest, and that if we don't, we won't be around for very much longer. On the profit point, I think you have to be careful to separate responsibilities. As a recipient of dividends, as an owner of a company, I've been brought up in a tradition that gives. And my family have made a point of that. My great-uncle who made a lot of money, sometimes, I can't say I'm happy about this, but he gave away the vast majority of his money to charitable trust, as did the next generation, as, God willing, I can make money, so I will do the same. But it's not my job to give away my shareholders' money. It's their job. So I think my first and foremost responsibility as a leader of a corporation is to give my shareholders the return they expect, and for them to decide what to do with the profits, not me.
Bishop Rome, would you like to comment on that?
Very briefly, just to come at it from a slightly different point of view, which is the way in which economists increasingly in the last few years, sorry to mention economists, but...
Oh, no. I love economists.
In the last few years have more and more come to see things like the environmental cost of a development as something that has to be built in to the real cost. That is, instead of just talking about externalities, a sense that you have to calculate profit and loss, bringing in those considerations. I don't think it affects the particular question you touched on, Simon, but it has something to do with a more global sense that we can't just talk about economic profit as if it existed in a bubble. There are other kinds of cost, social, environmental, and so forth, which have to be factored into the sums at some point in order to avoid a real sort of tunnel vision on the future of our economy.
Can I thank you both for your stimulating inputs, and particularly Simon for being deliberately provocative, which has been very enjoyable. Thank you. I'm very happy with the idea of wealth creation, but how do you suggest we create equality of opportunity to enjoy that wealth? Because it seems to me in the last 20 years or so, as wealth has increased, the gap between rich and poor has increased dramatically.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and it's hard not to address it politically. But what is interesting, I think, is that the greatest ingredient of all in any equal society is liberty. That if you look at the free nations, equality is far greater than in dictatorships. If you look at free economies, inequality disappears. Slowly but surely, the wealth, as economies grow, inequalities get smaller. If you go to places like India and China, you can find literally some of the richest people on earth and some of the poorest people on earth. And as economies grow, what tends to happen is that gap narrows. What's interesting is that the attempt to force the pace of that narrowing of the gap tend to result in failure. So I don't have an answer for you other than a free and fair market will choose the best people, and a well-run company will choose the best people as well. And that is the greatest insurance you can have for a meritocracy.
I'm moved by your faith in that. I'm not quite so convinced, I have to say, because we have seen in the so-called free economies of the world, as Alan suggested, something of a slippage in the other direction in the last few years, which I don't think is entirely down to a failure in growth. I don't know the answer any more than you do, but I'm a little less rosy about the assumption that a free market automatically produces equality. What I'm also concerned about is, I guess, something behind the question also, which is the Wilkinson-Pickett work, the spirit level, on the impact of rising levels or increasing levels of inequality on the morale of a whole population, which I think we are seeing.
I think the housing point that I made, nothing is doing more to increase the gap between rich and poor at the moment in the UK.
I think that's absolutely on target, I must say. I think we've got a question in the front.
Okay. There's one just here at the back, just quickly.
Thank you very much, Tim Holmes from Endurance Estates.
a sort of vested interest, I suppose, in the two topics that have raised their head today, growth and the housing crisis. And I'd like to ask the speakers how you think Ely could help with the housing crisis, and in particular, how can and how ready are Ely to deal with the opportunity? Talking tonight, there seems to be a great opportunity here with the fantastic facilities and a wonderful opportunity to share them with others in the region where there is, as everyone knows, incredible growth and requirement for housing. But my question is, how can Ely help deal with that crisis, and how ready is the city to deal with it?
I think that's a question which is probably better answered from the floor than the platform, because others will have a clearer sense of what's possible here.
Does anybody want to answer the question from the floor?
I can draw on the experience of other places. I don't know Ely well enough to comment, and much as I'm prepared to be provocative, I don't want to be rude. My concern is that when new development is proposed, that rather than say no, say make sure it's good development with the right infrastructure so that your roads aren't overcrowded, with beautiful buildings so that the quality of life in the village or the town, city, is not ruined. So attack the issues of quality, of infrastructure, of the effect it has on the houses around it. Don't just say no.
I'd underline the infrastructure point. I think this is crucial.
Will you introduce yourself?
And I think it's also an area where the church, educational institutions, the arts, all these need to come together and have very vigorous conversations about what's possible. I remember talking a few years ago to a group in Kent about what made a good program of housing development. And these were the issues that came up. Quality, use of local materials and sensitive materials in building, the life of leisure, the arts, the imagination, church and education involved. In a sense, they're all no-brainers, but it's surprising how much development has gone on which has ignored all that in the last 30 years.
Great.
Liz Every, I'm the mayor of the city of Ely, and I think I should respond to that. I actually agree with both our speakers, and I think the key for us in Ely is our partnership working, and that has developed hugely over the last 3 years. And if we continue to work together in order to get the best quality and to get the best for Ely, and that requires everybody here to participate, not just to listen to what others have to say, then I think we're well on the way to getting the city of Ely being where it should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
I have been actually dying to say, I have one question, and I don't know quite how to say it, but I was wondering, what is actually the difference? It has occurred to me, what is the difference between wealth and greed? Is there one? And therefore, should we be concerned about that? Because my concern as a human being in Ely, as you know, I live in Ely, is how can we make sure that the financial crisis doesn't happen again? Because I'm a little bit worried about the fact that people may be slightly greedy. I don't know, see, I'm quite interested in that.
It's a brilliant question.
Thank you.
I will have a go, but I thought the bishop should go first.
Let the bishop go first.
Yes, that's a brilliant question. I guess that what I was trying to think through in my remarks at the beginning was what wealth means against the background of a shared well-being. Greed is something I define as that habit of mind and action which is constantly veering away from shared well-being towards individual well-being as a thing in itself. And I think that's the heart of it, the difference between a conviction that well-being is something that can only exist as a common enterprise, and the greedy mindset, which is, well, it's about me, it's about Johnny Rocco once again, and Bogart.
I think that's right. I mean, what I was taught is that greed, this is my father speaking, greed is when you want something you know you don't deserve. It's when you want something that you know you haven't earned. And the recent banking crisis was kind of along those lines. All that money they were making, they knew that it was money for old rope. They knew that the products they were selling weren't right. And greed fundamentally has one great difference from ambition, in that greed is selfish and ambition is not.
We have time for one more question.
Peter Dorr. I believe that everyone in this room lives like a prince or princess compared to the Victoria's children. You know, we all have a dishwasher, we all have a coachman, and the like. What I want to know is how, in your growth world, how much is enough? And if you have a surplus, what do you do with it?
How much is enough? It's the question which, of course, Robert and Edward Skidelsky addressed in their very, very excellent, provocative book a year or so ago, which lots more people ought to be reading. And that was suggesting that there might be an optimal state of well-being. Maybe there is a level beyond which we don't need to go. That, I think, you would have some difficulties with from what I hear. But
With you.
it's a question that we ought to keep asking, I think, about any development, any form of growth. As I say, what for? What for? Does this actually increase those qualities of relationship, access to the goods of the mind and the heart? So, you know, I think it's a question we've got to keep on the radar. What we do with surplus? Well, all sorts of good answers to that. And speaking as chair of the trustees of Christian Aid, I can give you lots of helpful suggestions on that front.
I think there are two answers to your question. The first is that it's a question that we should all answer for ourselves, not have answered for us by someone else. It should be it's a free world. What I think you said about prince and princesses is absolutely right. That our lifestyles are infinitely better, more comfortable. There's less child poverty, there's less infant mortality. I mean, real things that affect our profound happiness are better. And speaking for myself, I can say that I have enough for what I want for myself. Does that mean I stop working? No. Does that mean I'm not ambitious? No. Because actually what wealth creation is, it is about making the world a better place. You can't create real wealth unless that is valuable to other people, and they define what's valuable to them. And that creative process that all of business is involved in is exciting and fun and interesting, and it is an innate quality that we have. I'm reminded of the Matrix. The Matrix where he can take the pill that gives him infinite comfort in a fake world, or a hard world, not so comfortable, but where he's really changing things. And we would all take the difficult pill because we want to change the world, and that is ultimately what good business is about, changing the world for the better.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the business group is here to consider the relationship between healthy business and the well-being of our community, and our purpose is to explore that relationship and strengthen that correlation. What Bishop Rowan you have done for us, what Simon you have done for us this evening, is to massively help us down that road, open our eyes, provoke us, and give us lots to go away and think about. Thank you both very much indeed on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.